Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm Rob Kent, as you know, author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and the newly released sequel, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. These two books together are my whole heart, and there's a third on its way. This is a middle grade science fiction adventure with a diverse cast. It's two books long so far, and we're working on the third, Banneker Bones, and the untitled third adventure right now. So, if you would, if you go to your library regularly, request a copy at your library. That way, you'll get to read it for free, and hopefully, somebody else will as well. If you can't wait that long, the Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees is available now as paperback. As an audiobook, and the ebook is free to download wherever fine ebooks are sold, whenever you're listening to or watching this. So go ahead and download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Get hooked on the series, then come see me with money for Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written horror novels such as the young adult novel All Together Now, a Zombie Story, which is about, surprise, zombies, and also All Right Now, a short zombie story. Both of those are available, as is the Book of David. The Book of David is a full-out adult horror novel. Lots of profanity, lots of violence, anything you could expect in an R-rated movie and beyond. And it is 5 volumes. It's about an atheist who buys a haunted house and then begins to receive religious visions involving flying saucers. So right away, you know if that's something you're interested in or not. If you want to try it out, just get your feet wet. The first volume, the Book of David, Chapter 1, is available to download as an ebook for free wherever ebooks are sold, whenever you're watching or listening to this. And then the other 4 chapters are available as well. Or you can just go ahead and go whole hog and get the compendium, which contains all 5. So go ahead and check out the Book of David. As always, to find out what's going on with me, what's going on with the Middle Grade Ninja podcast, head to middlegradeninja.com. Our next scheduled guest is going to be author Dustin Brady. He'll be here on Thursday of next week. And then after that, we'll be chatting with literary agent Molly O'Neill, author Amber Smith, plus some other great guests that we're still getting dates confirmed for. So look forward to that. As always, if you want to read interviews with literary agents, publishing professionals, and lots of my favorite authors, you can find hundreds of interviews available at middlegradeninja.com, including an interview with today's guest, literary agent John Rudolph, who has sat patiently through this entire intro. John, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Rob. How are you doing?
I am very excited to talk with you, and I really appreciate you making time to be here with us.
My pleasure.
I always say that there's one thing I'm terrible about. It's summarizing other people's books and other people's biographies. So if you would, if we could begin with just you telling a little bit of esteemed audience, a little bit about your background and an overview of your career thus far.
Sure. So I am a literary agent at Dystel and Goderich, actually Dystel, Goderich and Bourret, I should say, DG&B. I have been there, I think it's going to be 9 years 9 years in August. And prior to that, I was an editor at Putnam Books for Young Readers. I was there for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was at Simon and Schuster, where I started out as an editorial assistant. And that was Simon and Schuster Books for Young Readers as well. So I was a children's book editor for 12 years. The long story short, the layoffs hit. I was kind of checked out at that point anyway from Putnam. So when Jane Dystel asked me about whether I wanted to be an agent, it seemed like, a good opportunity, good way to sort of do some different things. And also on the children's side, at least, to be able to represent all kinds of authors and illustrators. As when I was an editor, I was sort of getting pushed to either specialize in fiction or specifically middle grade, actually. And as an agent, I really love the fact that I can represent picture books, YA, middle grade, nonfiction, pretty much anything as long as I can sell it. So at this point, my list is about, I would say, 65% kids books and maybe 35% adult nonfiction. On the children's side, I work with most of the author illustrators on our list. And that was actually another really good reason for me to join Dystel, was that when I started, we weren't really repping picture books and illustrators. And, Jane, to her credit, was, very open to the idea of bringing in illustrators to the firm and, expanding that part of our business. So I work with most of our author illustrators. I do quite a bit of middle grade, a smaller amount of young adult, and then I've been doing the last few years quite a bit of nonfiction at various levels, picture book, middle grade, and even a YA, a couple of YA nonfiction projects. Let's see, Dystel is a mid-sized agency, I would say. We're up to, I think, 15 employees right now and 10 agents. Between us, we cover the entire spectrum of publishing, adult fiction, adult nonfiction, children's, and anything and everything in between. We're based in New York, but we have an office in LA. And that's pretty much the size of it.
And for the uninitiated, who are some of the clients that you have worked with and are currently working with?
Let's see. On the picture book side, I work with Teague Bentley, whose book Little Penguin Gets the Hiccups, and its sequels have done extremely nicely for us. They're featured in Target, which is always a great boost to sales. Wendy Wahman, another picture book author, Brandon Todd, let's see, fiction, Leslie Youngblood, whose middle grade novel Love Like Sky came out last fall, YA, Alison Van Diepen, who's been published, has had a long career in YA. She's been published by Simon and Schuster, HarperCollins, Scholastic. Those are a few.
And so, a couple of questions for you.
Okay. Just a couple, right?
We've got time. We'll fire right away. Well, let's start with this, because I've been we've been kind of getting an overview. Been talking with having the good fortune to talk with so many editors and other previous agents. Just kind of getting an overview of how publishing works as a whole. And so one question I like to ask, and kind of demystifying things so that we can get information beyond just staring at a page online or in a publisher's marketplace. How did you get your career started as an editor originally?
I honestly, I don't really know. I still to this day don't know why I was hired at Simon and Schuster, other than, and this is terrible, but I had a friend of a friend who worked there. Beyond that, I guess good grades in college. I had been, when I graduated college with a degree in classics, which is, super useful. I
actually had that same degree, but go on.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Oh yeah.
What are you doing with it?
This.
This? Okay, there you go. So it is useful, actually. No, but I didn't know what I want to do with myself. I thought I might want to go to law school. I realized I didn't want to go to law school. And I had a friend who was working at Simon and Schuster Adult who really enjoyed it. Loved the idea that you could actually work on books for a living, read for a living, and I'd actually worked a summer at the Strand bookstore in the city, and so it was a rough job. I mean, it was a lot of dirty, sweaty work with some pretty creepy people, but it didn't turn me off totally. And actually, it was a great job in that it sort of demystified books for me, and you realize that books books are meant to be sold. They're a commodity to be sold, and they're a commodity to be manufactured as well. And when I got into book publishing, I really sort of loved the idea of actually making something physical, as opposed to just as a lawyer, pushing one piece of paper from one side of the room to the other. So I somehow I got the job, and it was in children's as an editorial assistant. And at the time, I thought, well, okay, I've got my foot in the door. I'll do 6 months in kids, and then maybe go upstairs and join the grown-ups. And it's 20 years later. I fell in love with kids books when I started. This was in 1997. And interestingly, I worked with David Gale, who was one of the great young adult editors going back to the 1970s. I mean, he sort of created the young adult genre, at least as a sales genre. But in the 90s, the young adult marketplace was so bad that he had actually been tasked with acquiring some picture books. And so we started acquiring picture books, and I just fell in love with the fact that you could work with artists, and that the artists who were doing the work were artists of the highest caliber. One of the first books that picture books that I worked on with David was John Lithgow's picture book debut, The Remarkable Farkle McBride, which was illustrated by C.F. Payne, who is just brilliant. And I mean, his illustrations are like Rockwell level paintings, and it's just that opportunity to work with artists just really just blew my mind. And I stayed in that. One of the nice things about kids books in those days was that assistants tended to get promoted more quickly than on the adult side. So my career moved up at a nice clip. And then also it was when Harry Potter came out. So all of a sudden, kids books were exciting. And Simon and Schuster had the Olivia series that started then. And, that was just huge. I mean, it sold zillions of copies. They also had all the Eloise reissues, and that got our publisher on the Today Show. So at 23 years old, and you're working in New York, and your publisher's on the Today Show, and you're doing these great books with these great artists, and it just that was it for me. And then so when an opportunity opened at Putnam to start building my list, I went over there and brought a couple people over, but really just start from scratch there, and did kind of a full list of picture books, middle grade and young adult.
So what is it that moved you from classics to middle grade specifically, but also picture books and some young adult, but with this focus on children's literature? When I assume you're more than capable of working with adult fiction all day, and of course you do with a portion of the list. What is it about middle grade that grabs your attention, and you said makes up about 60% of your list?
Well, I'd say it's more like about 50% is of my children's books. I'd say about 50% is picture books, and maybe then 30 or so is middle grade. I think middle grade. Well, just so with the picture books, I had studied some art in college, and I kind of came to it late in college, like junior and senior year, and by then I was sort of like, wow, gee, maybe I should have been an art history major. So, working with artists, that was a really big thing for me. But with the middle grade, I don't know. I felt like I gravitated toward, in a big way, sort of the plot heavy aspect of it. There was something about kind of the adventures that characters in middle grade novels go on, and this obviously is speaking very, very broadly, right? That appealed to me more, I guess, more than sort of the inward looking teen dramas. Not that I didn't enjoy that kind of stuff. I think, and I still do, but as a genre to work on, I think it just, I don't know, for whatever reason it appealed to me more. I think also I just wasn't all that familiar with it as a kid. I've talked about in my bio before that I wasn't a great reader as a kid. I read a lot of comic books, read a lot of Tintin comics, and I remember reading some sort of stuff like Encyclopedia Brown and the Great Brain series. But I don't really remember. Nothing of that age kind of stuck with me in the way that that it does for some editors. So coming to it as an adult, for whatever reason, just sort of struck a chord with me more.
So what was it that turned you around as a reader, that you went from not a big reader as a child to obviously majoring in the classics in school?
Well, one thing about the classics is, when you're doing translations, it's actually a pretty short chunk of text. So, you don't have to read these big long books so that you might as an English major. No, actually, it's so when I was in college, I took a couple of American Studies courses, and actually European Studies, American Studies, and they were basically great books classes, and taught by some some excellent professors who were just were great, but it was a huge reading load, and one of them, which I took my senior year, I remember. Two of them I took my senior year. The coursework, although you were supposed to read these, classics, I don't know, Anna Karenina, and just, long, I think we started with the Inferno and went through early 20th century, read some Proust. The only coursework for it was you were supposed to write like a 1-page appreciation paper every week. And sometimes the question was, what's the best section of this 900-page book and why? Well, that's pretty easy, right? So when I graduated, I had piles of these, the classics of American literature that I'd never read. And between college and becoming an editor, between that and Simon and Schuster, I spent a year living in Boston, where I kind of had an idea of working in publishing. Couldn't really find a decent job there. I mean, Little Brown was still up there at that point, Houghton Mifflin, but they definitely wanted people with internships and experience and stuff, which I didn't have. So I had quite a bit of downtime. I finally ended up working for a journal of cellular biology, which was quite an experience. But anyway, point is, I had a lot of downtime to read, and when I was doing that, I was just like, oh, this is making me happy. So that kind of sort of fed into my idea that maybe I should go into publishing, because I'm really liking reading as an adult, and I mean, I think if every college graduate could just get like 3 months to just kick back and read like the books that they didn't read in college, they might actually really appreciate it quite a bit more.
We've just given hope to, I know we've got lots of librarians and English teachers who listen to the show, and they're hearing this and say, oh, I've got a stubborn reader in my class now, but there's hope that could be John Rudolph.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Just, make sure that when you graduate from college, you got a degree in classics and are basically unemployed.
You'll be ready and primed to read.
Right. All right.
And then, so how does your early career as an editor now feed into your literary agent career? What does that bring to the table that maybe literary agents who don't have that background won't have available to them?
Well, I mean, I don't know, because I don't want to speak for people who go into it, without an editorial background. I mean, there are plenty of successful agents who don't. I've as the longer I've done this, the more I feel like I've turned off my editorial brain, because you're as an agent, you're serving a very different master than you are as an editor. As an editor, you are editing the book, for public consumption, but also for your publisher, for your sales team, for your marketing team. And publishers, whether they're sort of explicit about it or not, there is kind of this sense of what works for them. A Simon and Schuster book might not work as well for Random House. So, as an editor, you kind of edit to fit that mandate, as it were. As an agent, you're trying to sell the book, and so in that sense, you're kind of looking at it much more broadly. And also, I've just become much more over the years conscious of not stepping on any eventual editor's toes. I feel like there are things I can do to try and make a book more sellable, in terms of pacing, character development, working on the opening, what have you. But when I try to have I try and have a lighter hand, because the last thing I want is to be caught between an editor and an author, and have that author say, "Well, my agent says I should do this." That's just the kiss of death. One thing I will say is that typically on a submission, if we don't place it in the first round of submissions, we will get feedback from editors saying why they didn't take the book. And I feel like my background as an editor does help to, sometimes parse those comments and figure out how to implement any suggestions they might have. I also will say on the picture book level, I think just the technical training of, knowing how to lay out a picture book, 32 pages and papers, dedication, the idea of how things should look in spreads, that was actually has been extremely helpful. And I know that my some colleagues who have not had that, they'll come to me and ask, like, so how do I submit the picture book? And I'm like, okay, here's what you do.
So many questions. One thing that jumped out at me that I need to ask for the uninitiated. You mentioned each house has kind of its mandate that their editors are working toward, and I assume that you're looking through before you submit, so you know whether or not what you've got is more or less in line with that. How can you find out what that mandate is? Where can you obtain that knowledge?
Experience. And it's I have to say, it's not necessarily a stated thing. It's more like a feel that, oh, maybe Simon and Schuster is going more commercial these days. Random House is more literary. Some houses focus very heavily on YA at the moment. I don't know when it was. So, for instance, when I was at Putnam, it was towards the end there. It was right after the Hunger Games came out, and we were just, the sort of word from the top was acquire YA, big ticket YA, because that is what's selling. And if you don't worry about the school and library market, don't worry about whatever, just find that next big YA trilogy. I'm sure that trickled down to editors because, or trickled down to agents because, as in the couple of years sort of following that, I was getting a lot of YA trilogy submissions. So meeting with editors, looking at their, what they have in their catalogs coming out, reading Publishers Marketplace, seeing who's been making deals for what. You kind of get a sense. It's definitely not an exact science, and a lot of it is just hit or miss, just throwing stuff out there and throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. And that's something, actually, it's funny. I talk at conferences quite a bit about this, is that I just always am encouraging authors to submit, send your stuff in. Just send your stuff in. We say no, whatever. There's like 10 more of us, on the same street. Just keep going, because, it is not an exact science. And, to try and sort of, hone in on who's looking for what, like I am actually looking for a story about a three-legged dog, which I am going to sell to this editor because I know that this editor is interested in a three-legged dog story. It's just the likelihood of that actually happening is so slim that it's a fool's errand to try and really match up sort of one for one. So yeah.
Well, I just heard 100 queries hitting your inbox right this moment with stories about a three-legged dog.
That's fine.
So, well, how? I assume you're meeting with editors on a regular basis. The editors that you're working with, that you're placing clients with. Yep. How else are you meeting editors and getting a sense for who they are and what they're looking for?
Well, I mean, one advantage of working for a mid-sized literary agency is that, we all are very collegial, and we all share our contacts and our information, which is one of the best things about Dystel, really. And I think something that sets us apart from maybe, some of the bigger agencies who will remain nameless that have a reputation for being a lot more cutthroat. We just don't operate that way. So, we share information, we glean information, looking face-to-face meetings certainly is the best way to get a sense of an editor's sensibility. I typically will ask an editor when I meet them, tell me, about everyone in your imprint and who they are and what they're looking for if I don't know them already. And then again, like I said, Publishers Marketplace. I mean, that's a huge resource for us. Whenever I read anything, I always check the acknowledgements page to see, who's the editor that they thank. That's a great way to know who's, doing what kind of book. Granted that, they acquired that book a year and a half to 2 years ago, so their list might have changed since then. But again, it's just we're trying to kind of get a much more general sense than a strictly targeted sense. So yeah, acknowledgements are a huge resource. I love the fact that, if you're reading a book and you like that book, you can see who was the agent, who was the editor. It's super helpful.
I think it was Marcus Saki who said that if you get to an acknowledgement section and the author didn't thank their agent, you don't want that agent. Well, look for the next book.
Exactly, right.
Do you have time to read for pleasure beyond all the reading you have to do for work?
Some, not a ton. It's I wish I had more, but that's what summer vacations are for, I guess.
Fair enough. What kind of projects are you currently looking for?
Currently, I am looking for commercial middle grade. I am anything that's adventure. I really want to find something that's just funny. Humor, I know it's the toughest thing, but as I think I did a MS wish list on Twitter. If you can make me laugh, I'll sign you up. Unfortunately, people have not been making me laugh lately. I would love to find some good, funny middle grade. Not gross out stuff necessarily. Just funny stuff. I would also, though, love to find a more literary middle grade. One of the milestones in editor/agent's career in middle grade is winning a Newbery, and I haven't done it yet. So, I want that middle grade Newbery, type of book. I don't, now Newbery, loves historical fiction, and that's not really one of my strengths. I do like historical fiction if it's, something unusual, if it's a, time or place that has not been done to death. But American Revolution stories, Civil War, the Depression, I don't know, like kind of the basic touchstones I'm not so interested in. Picture books, I'm very much on the hunt for author illustrators still. Anyone who is a professional level illustrator who can write their own stories. That's sort of how I describe it. We are not set up to be a full service illustration agency. So, if someone can only do the art, we can rep them for picture books. We can't rep them for, commercial illustration, editorial illustration, advertising, products, whatever. So that's kind of out of our purview. But if you can write and want to do picture books, you're a person for us. Similarly, if someone wants to do graphic novels, I would love to sign up some graphic novel clients. I feel like every single one I've seen is basically a comic book artist, not necessarily a children's book graphic novelist. So that's a little tricky. But I'm definitely open to that. With YA, I'm mostly interested in contemporary, not particularly into fantasy. Maybe call it grounded fantasy, and some sci-fi. But high wizard goblin stuff, not for me.
So grounded fantasy would be something that mostly takes place in our world, but with some fantastical elements.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I feel like the fantasy of, like everyone, I think like the fantasy of the Hunger Games and the Divergent, like that kind of stuff has been, is tough to pull off these days. It has to be super original, and I just don't know if I have the best eye for it. So, I definitely look more, contemporary. I'd love to win a Prince. Haven't done that either. So, put that on the list as well. Yeah, basically the main awards, Prince, Caldecott, Newbery, just send those in. We'll get all three in 1 year. Be like the Triple Crown. It'll be great. Yeah.
What does an award like that do for both for an author and for a literary agent?
For an agent, certainly it's a big feather in your cap, and it certainly helps with subsidiary rights. Newbery winners are the books that typically, you can get a film option on, you can sell rights abroad. A Caldecott in particular is good for that because picture books tend not to travel so well to foreign countries. That's just, from a financial standpoint, sales standpoint, it's a huge boost. And for an author, obviously, it makes your career. If you are a non-best-selling author, certainly it'll vault you onto the best-selling list. And certainly it will guarantee that you are going to have more books published in the future. And I would imagine too, just from an author's perspective, if you're not doing school visits, there's your, there's your golden ticket. Hi, I just won the Newbery. I'd like to come to your school. I think you'll be able to line up some visits pretty quickly with that.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I know that Meg Medina, every time I see who won this year's Newbery, every time I see her on social media, is off to another visit someplace else. She's extremely popular.
Yeah. Yep. Uh-oh. Did I lose you?
John, are you?
I'm still here. You're a little frozen.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Can you see me?
I can. You're a little pixelated.
Oh, that's weird. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that anybody watching on. I think anybody watching on YouTube can still see my beautiful, fully pixelated face. So
okay. You're a lot less pixelated.
I think we'll be all right.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to ask you about your taste, because I know when we talked back in 2010, taste change.
Yeah.
But at that time, you'd said that your favorite books were On the Road by Jack Kerouac, M.T. Anderson's Thirsty, and the record guides from Robert Christgau from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Is that
Yeah.
still pretty accurate, or has that evolved since then?
So when I gotta ask, I cannot remember what that was from. When did we talk about that?
We faced the 7 questions on Middle Grade Ninja back in 2010.
Okay, that's what it was. I was trying to rack my mind if it was that at a conference? Was that, I Googled myself to see if I could, come up with that, and man, didn't really come up. Those are still some of my favorite books. This I did write down, so I'm gonna consult notes here. Most recently, a book that really just blew my mind was, on the adult side, Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. Which is sort of his story of Bob Marley, but wrapped up in many, many different layers, and just amazingly told. I mean, that book absolutely blew my mind. Continuing on the music theme, the Springsteen memoir, Born to Run. I mean, that was really, that's still probably, that took the place of Keith Richards as like the all-time best, rock star memoir I've ever read. And just, I mean, it's just, I tend to think of Springsteen as a thoughtful guy. I never really sort of realized just how thoughtful he is. And seeing that was really, just spectacular. I don't know. For kids, I think a lot of the middle grade that has been growing on me lately has been the stuff that I've been reading with my kids. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. The 7-year-old is very into Wimpy Kid right now, and I won't say that's one of my favorites, but I do appreciate it. But we've been going through Percy Jackson with my 10-year-old, and I got to say that has really, really grown on me. The first one, I just remember thinking, God, what a ripoff of Harry Potter, and as a classicist, God, he just totally played, fast and loose with that stuff. But as we've read the books and as they've gone on, I'm really impressed with not only his inventiveness in terms of plotting and situations and how he can, really just build this world and keep it all together. But also the characterization. I think the characters, as he's introduced more characters, they seem, much deeper and more thought out and more recognizable as they go along. I mean, I feel like Leo and Hazel in particular, I'm just like, wow, those are really interesting characters. And just to see someone evolve like that has been, just a really, really sort of, interesting to me, because I feel like there's so many books where, like, I read the first one and, if it's great. I feel like I've read all I need to read. I don't need to read the next in the series. And if I don't like it, I'm definitely not going to read the one in the series. So I'll give credit to my son Henry for pushing me through on those.
And Mr. Riordan, if you're listening or watching, or what if your people are listening or watching, I love Percy Jackson. I didn't see any resemblance to Harry Potter whatsoever. Please come on the podcast. That will be an amazing conversation. Let me ask you about humor, because you mentioned funny books. Obviously, that's extremely subjective. So if somebody's trying to tickle your funny bone, what's the kind of stuff that makes you laugh? What are books that make you laugh?
Oh gosh, that is one of the hardest things. I mean, it could be anything really. It could be be anything. And I said I wasn't looking for like sort of gross out bathroom humor. The Day My Butt Went Psycho. I mean, that it's a perfect title,
It's a classic.
And it's hysterical. It's a hysterical book. I don't know, something like Wonder. Actually, it has some very funny moments in it. It really does. And obviously, it's a very it's a real tearjerker, heart pulls at your heartstrings, but it, it's got funny stuff in it. Percy Jackson is very funny. There's just great jokes, great little sort of moments where the characters are thrust into ridiculous situations, and great like instances of playing with sort of tropes. I think one of the things he does most successfully is sort of making kind of doing funny stuff with classical things like Medusa, having that what was it, the shop in the junkyard, in the first book, kind of bringing them into the present day. Ares is like the biker dude. I mean, there's just, I don't know, things like that are, and like you say, humor is one of the hardest things to identify. But I think it's just a very good sense of the ridiculous, being able to put your characters in ridiculous situations without making them seem ridiculous themselves, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because you always want to have sympathy for the characters. You always do. And, it's hard to be sympathetic for someone if the author is not showing that sympathy by how they treat those characters. So hope that makes some kind of sense.
It does. Sometimes the one way an author can hook me is if I can tell that they clearly despise their character, and then I may or may not agree, but I just enjoy reading how much does this author hate this character? What's going to happen to them? Oh, they died. Well, that figures.
Yeah, it's true. I got to say, one thing I often talk about is that the best characters in a lot of books are the villains, and if you can come up with a great villain, that's something, that's something fantastic. Percy's got a lot of great villains, but no one compares to Voldemort. I mean, he's the ultimate. He's the Darth Vader, and everyone loves Darth Vader. So yeah, work on your villains, folks. Work on them, especially in middle grade.
I don't think I've encountered a villain. Well, I have to be careful when I make statements like this, because if I ever reviewed one of your middle grade books at my blog, that book is my favorite. But one of my favorite villains in all of middle grade fiction has got to be the Grand High Witch from The Witches.
Mm-hmm.
I think about her almost on a monthly basis, and her great speech, and her just decidedly devious plan to wipe out the children of the world.
Yeah.
Well, so if somebody's listening to this, watching this, esteemed audience says to themselves, well, my God, I have a book that I think would be perfect for John Rudolph. As I'm listening, I'm checking off all the boxes. Me. Yeah. How should they reach out to you? What's the best way to approach you for representation?
Email submission. So you go to our website, dystel.com, dystel.com. Go there. You will find our submission guidelines. Basically, we call for a query letter and a sample. But please read them because they're on there and they're important. And then email me. My email address is there on our website, but if you want it, it's jrudolph, RUDOLPH, @dystel.com. And the thing I always just recommend is that, tell me where you heard about me. So if you're querying me because you heard this podcast, say, I was listening to the Middle Grade Ninja podcast, and you said this and this, and I thought maybe, this might appeal. I am extremely vain, and so any, kind of connection that you can make to me personally definitely makes me perk up. I have signed up clients who, wrote, "Dear Sir or Madam." I look at all my queries, so I'm certainly willing to look at them, even if they don't have a personal connection. But, if you do, please mention it. I always say this at conferences, if I met you at the conference, make sure you mention that. So if you heard this, make sure you mention that.
And tweet about it. Tell your friends.
Yeah.
Let other literary agents know that this is a wonderful place to come and talk. So I'm assuming that you're looking at your inbox on a regular basis, and you've got anywhere from 20 to 100 to however many queries you've received.
Mhm.
Something I'm fascinated about is how do you as an agent then go about winnowing that down to a manageable number? And then when you're looking at a submission, after you read the first paragraph that's nice things about you, what are you evaluating? What are you looking for that propels you to want to read a sample or take an interest in what you're seeing?
Well, I do read query letters, and I do think they're an important part of the submission process. I think it's very important for a writer to be able to um, speak intelligently about their book and to get other people excited about their book. When they're describing their book, and that's basically what a query letter is. It's I always like it to applying for a job. If you're applying for a job, your manuscript is your resume, it's your work, and your query letter is your cover letter. So, if you're applying for a job, you want to get someone excited by your cover letter about why they should hire you. Same thing with your query letter. And with that, you want it to be professional. The ones that really turn me off are kind of the silly ones, the ones that are overly friendly, the ones that sort of go on and on about why they wrote the book. I don't particularly care why anyone wrote a book. I want to read the book. I care much more about, what the book is about, where you see it in the marketplace, and, what, if anything, you can do to promote it. Those are sort of the criteria that I look for in a query letter. So, the ones that will get me going to read the manuscript are the ones that are really professional and just kind of stick to the work itself, as opposed to giving me their life story, or I wrote this book because I think it's very important to have this book out there in the world to do this, and this. It's up to the publisher to figure out how what the book is going to do once it's out in the world. You just want it in the world. Beyond that, then I do read the sample. I tend to read them very quickly, and I tend to I tend not to get very far for the majority of them.
What's average, would you say? Maybe 10 pages, less?
It can be less. It can be a page. Sometimes, from that first paragraph. I hate to say it, but that is the reality. I get queries from, like you said, I get, I don't know, maybe 10 queries a day, 50 queries a week, 75 queries a week. That's I can't do the math, but somewhere in thousands of queries a year. They come at all levels, and some of them I can tell very quickly are just not professional grade. If I do keep going for the 10 pages or so, or through the 3 sample chapters, then chances are I will look at you as a client. I would say if I do request a full, my sign up rate from that dramatically increases from whatever 1 in 1,000 to 50% maybe. A lot of the time if I request a manuscript, I will be talking about author by representation. Maybe not 50%, maybe a little less than that, but.
So if you request a manuscript, the author that hears this should think, I'm 50-50, flip a coin. This could be my moment.
No, don't get your hopes up too high, but it's a very good sign. It is a very good sign. Yeah.
And then you mentioned you're looking for what can the author do to promote it. What could an author write there that would turn your head? What would strike you as somebody that's got an ideal platform or a means to promote a book?
Well, with kids' books, it's not as important to have that built-in platform by any stretch. I would, being a teacher does not necessarily mean that you have a platform. Being a librarian does not necessarily mean that you have a platform to promote the book. Having a lot of social media numbers for something unrelated doesn't necessarily mean you have the ability to promote the book. I think if you are writing on a kind of specific topic that you have expertise in, and you do have some reach on that, that can certainly help. But it's much more, I think, knowing that you are part of a community and of writers, and that you are doing your work, that you're a member of SCBWI. I always like to see that. That you have a critique group, that you are working with other writers. I mean, I'm always sort of amazed and impressed with submissions when I get from an author who, an unpublished author who's been able to get someone impressive to read their book. Yeah, Neil Gaiman took a look at my book and thought it was great. The community of children's book writers out there is so generous and so willing to help up and coming writers, that to not tap into that is really puts yourself at a disadvantage. So so to see that you're engaging in the writing community, I think is sort of the best thing that you can do, at least at the submission stage. Once you're published, then I really think it's all about appearances. School and library appearances, just getting yourself physically out there, bookstores. It's grueling, but that's how you build an audience. I know it's old fashioned too, but there's so much noise in the Twitterverse, and there's so much noise on social media that it just becomes background, and it doesn't sell books. Because that's, at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're not trying to just make a name for yourself. You're trying to sell books. So you can have those, 50,000, 100,000 Twitter followers, whatever it is. You get your royalty statement and you're only selling 5,000 copies. That's what the publisher is going to look at and say, we can't take on your next book. So that is, if I could, one huge piece of advice is just get yourself out there.
What's the best way for an author to do that? Should they, once they have a contract in place or a book launch date, should they reach out to a publicist such as the wonderful Megan Beatty, or a different publicist who's available to get those set up for themselves? Should they be reaching out to schools directly themselves? What are the most successful strategies you've seen authors employ to get out there?
I don't really know too much about how publicists work, to be honest, in this day and age. I've never, with apologies to Megan, because I've never worked with her. The ones that I have had clients work with have not, they've been maybe able to get some media events, perhaps, like maybe some radio shows and maybe some bookstore appearances. I don't feel like I've seen people get authors into the school and library community. Now, I could be totally wrong, and there could be people who are very good at that. So don't take my word for that, authors, please. But I think much more than that, you should be talking to the school and library marketing people at your publishing house, talking to them about how's the best way to go about this. Who do I contact? How do I contact people? And then, assuming you are already part of the children's book community, querying your author friends, looking into SCBWI, trying, just using your network to find out resources and find out the best way to set up appearances. I'm not even sure that cold calling is such a bad idea either. It's schools are a lot of schools are desperate to have people come in and do presentations. I'm sure my kids' school would love it. They could do more of those. Not sure that they'll pay for them, but but it is exposure, and that's the sort of the goal behind it more. I mean, you can certainly if you are a appearance junkie, and you can do like zillions of 100 appearances a year that are paid appearances, you can make a nice sort of side living doing that. But in terms of book exposure, it's I'm not sure if paid appearances are necessarily the only way to do that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, and I think that's a little tangential anyway. So,
well, it's speaking of tangential.
okay.
John Rudolph,
Yes.
former editor, current literary agent, publishing professional. Have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I have not seen a flying saucer. Do I believe in them? Sure, why not? But until I see one, I will be a skeptical believer. How about that?
Fair enough. I would call myself a hopeful believer.
Okay, sure.
It's on my bucket list to see one before I go.
Okay.
Let's talk about one thing I wanted to ask you about is on your manuscript wish list. You've got listed Big Think, and I just was curious. I hadn't seen that before. How would you classify a Big Think?
I would classify that as first of all, that's for adult nonfiction. So it doesn't really apply to us, but the kind of book that sort of looks at culture as a whole and talks about how we can better ourselves, how we can change things. So something that sort of goes across publishing genres. I mean, something like top of my head, Lean In. That kind of book. Talking about Malcolm Gladwell is sort of the archetypical big think author. There's a huge interest, I think, among publishers in signing up neuroscientists and people who study the brain, because I think there's a lot of sense that if we look more in the brain, we can kind of figure out kind of the big issues of our time and how to better ourselves through it. So that's kind of what I mean. If you want to say Big Think equals Malcolm Gladwell, there you go. That's probably
Malcolm. I teach writing classes here at the Indiana Writers Center, including a fiction workshop, which starts this Sunday. So if you're in the area, go ahead and head to Middle Grade Ninja, sign up. But one of the books that I mentioned that's not directly related to writing, because we do story about Robert McKee. He's a god to me. We talk about that. We talk about on writing, all the standards, John Gardner, all that good stuff. But I always try and recommend Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, because that's the book I wish I had read before I got started working toward publishing, just because of the analysis of the data and the kind of the confirmation of what if you really sat down and thought about there being 300 million people in the country would stand out and sort of make sense. But he just goes through and he puts it there in black and white. And I feel for authors who are just natural dreamers anyway, a book like that gives you the data and the pure numbers of what it takes to be successful and how much of being successful is really being in the right place at the right time, and you can prove it empirically. That kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off, where you can go, okay, well, I'm going to work as hard as I can, but there are some things that are just a little bit bigger than me that aren't necessarily directly in my control.
So
there we go. Advertisement for Malcolm Gladwell.
And your class, right?
Sure. And Mr. Gladwell, you are also, like Mr. Riordan, welcome on anytime. It's a question I'm obligated to ask is, in the age of the indie publishing revolution, what are still the advantages of going with a literary agent and the traditional publishing model, as opposed to making your book available and never having to write a query letter in your life?
Well, I mean, so it's interesting. When ebook publishing sort of got off the ground, or self-publishing got off the ground, and 50 Shades was this big phenomenon, and suddenly indie authors were selling massive quantities of books over Amazon. We Jane Dystel very smartly reached out to them and took on a bunch of them as clients, and was able to parlay some of their success into traditional book deals for them. At this stage, those traditional book deals, I think, are probably doing better than their indie publishing. I mean, indie publishing really relies on you not only as an author, but you as a marketer, and your ability to connect over social media. And as I said before, there's so much noise out there that to be successful at it is extremely, extremely difficult. With a with a traditional publisher, what you're getting with that is you are getting the publishing house's support. You are not only getting the physical production of your book, which I think is something that most authors really do appreciate, getting their beautiful hardcover or paperback book well designed and with a nice looking cover on it. So you're getting that. You're getting the support of the marketing department. And even, I know, authors love to complain about the marketing department at their publishers. I will say, in their defense, while I think they could do more, they do a lot behind the scenes that authors just don't see in terms of, getting the book out there, particularly in the school and library community, which I think is still a very important piece of middle grade publishing and picture book publishing. YA, perhaps not so much, but certainly if you're writing at that younger level, the school and library is still very important. There is that. I think, working with a publisher to, you'll get better review attention if you're working with a publisher as well. You will, and ultimately you will have a team behind you as opposed to just being you at your computer, which I think, is appeals to quite a few people. Now, as far as an agent and how an agent fits into that, certainly we are, in a way, kind of the gatekeepers to the publishers. So we can help you with that. We can also be the advocate for you when it comes to the publishers, because you do want someone else in your corner in case there ever is a dispute. You certainly want someone who is versed in contracts, which we are. And if you sign with an agent, as opposed to going it alone, you will probably get better terms with an agent. Moreover, whatever rights an agent can retain for you, unless you're a Hollywood big shot or somehow know publishers in foreign countries, you're not going to be able to place your film and TV rights or your foreign and translation rights without the assistance of an agent. And, that's, again, a place where we can come in very, very handy.
If you would, help demystify who and what a literary agent is. What does your overall week look like? What's your day look like? And if one of the esteemed audience members listening reaches out to you with the perfect book and you get them signed, what does that relationship look like going forward? Which is a very big question.
Okay, well, so let's see. What does a day or a week look like? Typically I try and start my day going through my queries, and I try and go through the ones that I get the day before. Now, I get thrown off that schedule really quickly. Like whenever I miss a day whenever I'm out of the office for a day, or, if I go on vacation, or, even if it's a long weekend, I get backed up almost immediately. But when I'm in a good clip, I do get through my queries, first thing. After that, I'm doing, it can be a lot of different things. It can be working on edits for an author. It can be negotiating the finer points of a deal for an author. It can be vetting a contract. It can be sending out a submission. Typically I get out, I don't know, at least 1 or 2 submissions a week, sometimes maybe more, depending on the time of year. So prepping a submission, putting together the list. Then I'd say at least once a week I'm having in-house meetings, or not in-house, like lunch or in-person meetings with editors. So trying to build my my contact base and sort of build on the contacts that I already have. And then one thing, we do have some in-house meetings at Dystel, so there are those. Sometime we will, about every 2 weeks or so, a publisher or a film agent or someone will come to us, so we'll have a meeting, as a group with them. There are literary events going on at night. There are literary events sometimes going on during the day. So I'm out of the office at those. At night I'm reading. At lunch I'm reading. But then I'm also, I do try and look for ideas for new projects. And if I read a news story and think that might make a good book, maybe I'll reach out to that author. Now that's more on the adult side than on the kid side, but that does take up probably on average about a half hour of every day. So that's kind of what my day looks like. If I do sign you up, or if I'm interested in signing you up, I'll reach out over email and then suggest we set up a phone call. I always want to talk to someone before we start working together, or if they're in the city, we'll meet in person. Once it seems like this, you are someone I think I could represent, I will we have an agency agreement where we ask you to just sign an agreement saying you give us the right to try and sell your book, for which we will take our 15% commission. Once that's in place, then we start working together. If the manuscript is in perfect shape and ready to go, fantastic. That's almost never the case. So we'll go through a round of edits, maybe two. But I do like to try and get things out quickly if I can. Once I do, once it's ready, I'll put together the submission list. I'll put together a cover letter, send it out. If there are editors in particular who I think might be interested, again, this is not an exact science by any stretch. I might call them and tell them it's coming. And then there's waiting, and there's some waiting. Sometimes people jump on it right away. Sometimes they don't. I had a client recently who got an offer, that the editor had the book for a year. A full year, and just hadn't gotten to it. So I try and give people about 6 to 8 weeks to get back to me. If it seems like it hasn't sold, we'll do another round of submissions. If the book does sell, then I'll negotiate the terms of the deal. Deal with any counter offers. Once we have a deal in place, I run everything by the client, make sure that they're okay with the terms. Once we say yes and pop the champagne, then I'll get the contract. I'll vet the contract to make sure it's kosher. The agent, the author, the client will sign the contract. They'll be good to go. They'll start working with their editor. And at that point, I'm really then trying to place any ancillary rights I can, any subsidiary rights, any film rights, any foreign rights if we are able to retain them. And if the book is accepted, then we'll start talking about the next project. And for clients whose books I can't place, which does happen, I always say that as soon as the book goes on submission, its first time it goes on submission, start working on your next book, because I do view clients as long-term clients. There are very few authors that I've taken on where it's just been kind of like, I'm taking you for this one project and then that's it. I really see them as, my role is trying to, develop an author's career, and set them up for the long term.
So for that next project, do you kind of have a conversation with them about what sort of project? Yeah, have some tea.
Mm.
I know you mentioned you
Getting a
were
little
just getting
scratchy.
over a nasty flu this week, so I appreciate you powering through and
Not at
making the
all.
time
Not at
for
all.
us. But I wanted to ask, what do you have input onto what a client's next project might be while they're waiting for the news, the 6 to 8 weeks for that first
Oh, yeah,
edition?
I mean, that is often, and interestingly, that is often where I can play a pretty significant role because a lot of the time, uh, the client, I've signed them up for that first project, and it's a great book, and it's the reason why I signed them up. And then we've got book number two, the sophomore slump, but or not sophomore slump, sorry, sophomore jinx. Um, typically they've got more than one project. So the idea is to try and figure out which one makes the most sense. It can be building on some of the, maybe looking at the feedback that you got. If editors are all pointing to something as a strength, maybe, really trying to build on that. Maybe trying to do something different or do something in a different genre. That can be a conversation as well. So yeah, there can be quite a bit of strategy and such that goes into sorry, one second. That goes into the next sort of round of what we're going to do. And yeah, I think that actually is one of my more sort of important functions as an agent.
And I wanted to also ask, because there's just endless information. Anybody can go to Janet Reed, the Query Shark, head to John Cusack. He's got a great video that we linked to about how to write a great query letter. So
Yeah,
that information is out there pretty much across the board.
good.
But something that doesn't get touched on quite as often is that initial phone call with an agent or meeting an agent at a conference. So can you give us an example of what you're looking for and maybe a good conversation you've had with somebody, either at a conference or on a phone or both, and a bad conversation that you've had with somebody?
I think I think the best conversations are the ones where there's a connection. There's some connection of shared interest, like minds. Someone who has a general knowledge about the publishing industry and what they're getting themselves into. You don't have to be like, you don't have to know every editor's name in at HarperCollins, but kind of just to have done some research and have a general sense of what you're getting yourself into, I think is very helpful. Yeah, so those are the good conversations. They're really, I like to know their history as what their history is as a writer. Why did you write this book? Not what you want to do with this book, but where did it come from? What else have you written? That's always a big question. So if you do have just that one manuscript, that's always the toughest client. It's like, so yeah, I want to know that you've written other stuff, in particular with picture book authors, because the return on a picture book is so small. Picture book advances are so small that you need to have quite a bit of material to make a go of it.
What's an average advance, would you say, for a picture book?
Around $5,000 for the author. It's one of the reasons, frankly, why I look for author illustrators, because if you have someone who can do the whole package, there's more money to be made. Anyway, so a conversation with an author that doesn't go so well is the one that is where the author sees it as very transactional. You're there to provide a service for which I'm paying you, my 15% from my earnings. And I think the whole publication process is a collaboration. It's a collaboration between author, illustrator, editor, jacket designer, marketing professionals, publicist, sales team. I mean, there's a lot of hands involved in getting your book out there. And I think, the authors who sort of see it as, what are you doing for me, as opposed to how can I work with you? Those are the tougher conversations. And it hasn't happened very often, but there have been a couple times where I've talked to someone and it just doesn't feel like it's a good match. It happens. The other reason I will say too that I have not where I've held off with representation sometimes is if that person is not really prepared. So if they've written a sample, this happens more on the adult side, I would say. Like if they've written like a book proposal, but they haven't really started their research yet, or they haven't written a sample chapter yet, or something is incomplete. It's not so much true with fiction or on the kids side, but it does happen sometimes. The other thing too is that if there is a submission history that I don't know about, and that can really kill the deal, because it's just it doesn't matter if I'm the one sending it out. If it's already been to Simon and Schuster, I can't go back to Simon and Schuster. If they said no, just because I'm a different guy sending it doesn't mean they'll take it. So
even if you've got another editor that you know personally.
Yeah, it depends on the imprint for sure. If they've seen it, then yeah, they're not gonna take a second look. It's hard to get past those, and I've had that happen. I certainly, and I think it was a learning experience for me where I submitted a manuscript. I can think of a very specific one, and I sent it to a publisher whose name rhymes with Little Brown, and they came back to me and said, "Hey, we actually saw this like, I don't know, 6 months ago." And I, said, "Oh, sorry about that. I was unaware that it had been shopped previously." It's embarrassing for me. And certainly, that book did not get sold because it had been out before. So that is something very important to know. I mean, if you have been rep prior, or if you have submitted the book, on your own, and it's gone to and you have actually gotten responses, if you've gotten rejections, or been to an editorial meeting and been discussed, then I definitely need to know that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have your authors putting you out there unprepared and then getting sort of ambushed.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to work. Another question I wanted to ask you. Well, I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to narrow it down since I know we're running close to our time together today.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We can keep going.
But I always like, when I'm talking with anybody in the publishing industry, a question that I have is, a few episodes back, we chatted with author Lamar Giles, who was one of the founding members of We Need Diverse Books. Check your back catalog. Great episode. Yeah. But of course, the whole reason there was this movement for We Need Diverse Books is because we need diverse books. For a very long time, publishing has not been good about putting diverse voices out there. So a question that I've been asking everybody I can is, what are you seeing the industry doing to rectify that wrong? And what are you and what is Dystel doing specifically to promote diversity in publishing?
Well, so I think, for one, I mean, the publishing industry has responded in a major way. I mean, we see, you see new imprints that are focused specifically on bringing diverse voices to light. You're seeing new publishers. Arthur Levine's new venture, I mean, is the goal there is to bring diverse voices to light and to publication. So between We Need Diverse Books and the Own Voices movement, I think publishers are doing a really good job of addressing it. And I mean, look, there's I hope it's a sustained effort. uh, my fear, frankly, is that like a lot of things in publishing, we editors go through. It's not fair to call it this, but editors, they go through trends. And right now, I'm hearing all these editors saying, "I want diverse voices, people of color. I want projects from them." I think that's fantastic. I hope it is not just something we're hearing for the next 6 months, and then in 6 months we hear, we want urban fantasy or books like Wonder. I mean, or whatever it is. I just hope it's a sustained effort as opposed to a temporary one. As far as what we at Dystel and myself personally. I think we just at Dystel we have, frankly, I think we have a pretty long track record of working with artists from diverse backgrounds, working with authors who are people of color. From back when Jane represented Barack Obama's first book to her current client Tayari Jones, who's been sitting on the bestseller list all year. I mean, I think we have a pretty impressive roster of people of different backgrounds. And for myself personally, it's kind of always been I don't know if mandate's the right word, but it's something I've always, whether consciously or not, kept in mind, because one of the first author I ever signed up at Simon and Schuster when I was, and I didn't, well, I guess I can say I signed him up. When I was an assistant, was Pete Seeger, the folk singer. He had done a book with Simon & Schuster. He'd done Abby-Yo-Yo, but that was 15 years before I'd gotten there, and he hadn't really done much since. And he'd always been a hero of mine. I knew his family. I had a friend who was working with him, so I got in touch and asked him if he wanted to do more books. And he said yes, and so we did Abby-Yo-Yo Returns, and then we did a version of Turn, 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 and Stone Soup. And working with Pete, I mean, the concept of social justice is just, it's not even a concept to him. It was who he was. And to see a person to have the experience of working with someone who just lives that, it's one of the more powerful, formative experiences of my life. So from that, I was just always interested in, working with authors from diverse backgrounds. And I certainly worked with a number as an editor, and it's something that I've always been on the lookout for as an agent. And I would offer that if you look at my my list of authors, both as an editor and an agent, you would see a pretty good commitment to that.
Makes sense to me, and I share the same fear that that this may be the teen vampire for a while, and then publishing will move on, and they need to stay right where they're at for a bit.
They do, and I think it's just more I was asked this question about social justice not too long ago, actually, when we were applying for schools for my younger son, and it sort of caught me a little off guard just in that setting. But when I started thinking about it, and I started realizing that it's. And I'm not trying to say this to toot my own horn or anything, but I feel like we need to get to the point where we are not consciously looking for these stories as sort of a way to, fill the holes in the market or to, make up for publishing's, sad failures of the past. I think we need to get to that place where we are looking for great stories from all perspectives, in a sort of equal kind of way, and not have it be this that we consciously need to look for these things. I wish we could get to that point, and I feel like now it's certainly it's great that it is in people's consciousness. I hope we can get beyond that to the point where it is just part of the publishing program and not, we need these. We have diverse voices. That's what I would like us to get to.
I think Lamar said that he was looking forward to the day when there was a ton of mediocrity by people of color out and about. They weren't the best books. They're available. They're so widely that we have room for the garbage books that you ordinarily wouldn't read by people of color as well as other authors. Let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, we talk just a little bit about agent etiquette, because that's another one of those things I'm fascinated by, because it's a little bit more difficult to hone. So a question I always ask is, what are signs that you should maybe need to break up with your agent? And if you reach that point, what's the best way to break up with them? Or break up's the wrong word, but discontinue your business relationship with your agent, and vice versa. What are some signs you can look for that maybe your agent is considering discontinuing that business relationship with you?
Well, look, I mean, I think your use of the word business is a very good one, because it ultimately, while I don't like people to think of it as a transactional relationship, it is a business relationship. And if your agent is not making you money, or if you're not seeing the value in what they are delivering in terms of advancing your career or advancing your writing, then maybe your relationship has run its course, or maybe you weren't the best match to begin with. So I think just being upfront, being honest, having that hard, honest conversation is important. Usually the signs are there in that, for whatever reason, the agent wasn't able to place your book, or if you've had a longer term relationship and you're seeing your royalty statements and the sales just aren't there, and your advances are going down, and your agent is not really improving things for you, maybe that is time to look elsewhere. A sign that your agent is losing faith in you, I hate to say it, but response time certainly is one. It's very hard to give clients the level of attention that, to give clients who are not producing, and who are not producing or coming up with viable projects, the level of attention that someone who is will get. So, if you're not hearing from your agent, or if you're not hearing from them in a timely fashion, or, or they're not responding to your current work, then, maybe the fault is with them and not with you. So, that's something to you have to sometimes take a step back and just think about, what is best for me. Because at the end of the day, it's true, your name is on the cover, and you have to do what's best for you as the author. So yeah, just look, any agent who's been at this a while knows that these things happen. And then you can, if you start to have that conversation, and the agent says, it's only to the effect of, "Oh my gosh, no, I'm so sorry. Look, I believe in you. I love you. You're the best. I think I can do this and this and this for you." Maybe you give him a chance. Maybe you let him prove it. But I think a lot of the time, if the author's feeling it, the agent is feeling it too. It's not always the case. I did have a client who recently who told me she was thinking about moving on after we finished the project we were working on, and it really took me by surprise. But but a lot of the time, those conversations will end up being much more mutual than you might think.
That makes sense. Yeah. And when you mentioned reasonable response times, just because I know there's lots of authors listening, we should define that. If I haven't heard from an agent in 5 minutes, should I panic? What
yes,
is a
reasonable
reasonable
absolutely
response?
Panic. it's well, it depends on the kind of communication. I mean, if you're sending an email, that's just a regular communication, a question, whatever have you. A few days if you haven't heard. If it's been more than a week, try again. If it's getting on to a few weeks and they haven't responded, then that might be cause for concern. If they write, if you write to them after that and they respond, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Somehow I missed your response in my inbox. I don't know what happened." That happens. I mean, our emails, get pushed down so quickly these days that, I do miss stuff. So, see what happens then. If it's still more radio silence, then then there might be some cause for concern. But every client likes to think that they're the only client that agent has. And we try and make those clients feel like they're the only client that the agent has. I mean, we want you to feel special and we want you to feel like you've got our undivided attention. But we do have a lot of clients, and unfortunately, we just can't respond to everyone as quickly as they might like.
How many clients are you typically juggling?
I would say at the moment, I usually have about 35 to 50 active clients. Those are clients who are either with books sold, books that are on submission, or books that are in development. And then I have probably another, at this point, 35 to 50 clients who are sort of legacy clients, and this is much more on the adult side, authors who have sold a book, and that was their book, and it might be 5 years before they have another one, or they might not have another one at all. But I did a book with Herman Russell, who is a real estate developer in Atlanta, who was involved with the civil rights movement. He was 80. He wrote his memoir. I think that's his only book. But he's still a client, and he's still, we still get the royalty, checks for him, and so he's on our list. So there are clients like that. But I'd say 35 to 50 is kind of the working group at the moment.
And then while we're talking about agent etiquette, obviously I'm a stoic rock, completely 100% confident myself, but I know other authors can sometimes be a little bit insecure, and they can be a little bit needy, and I just need my agent to hold my hand.
Mm-hmm.
How often should someone contact their agent? How often is too often? When are they starting to get not on your nerves because you're also a rock, but other agents, when might they get on their nerves?
Right. Sorry, are you hearing by those bells? I think it's my email going off, and I'm not sure how to set it off. So I hope not. Okay. I think in that case, so to answer that question, every agent is different in that respect. I think that's a personality thing as much as anything else. Some agents are, their author's best friends, and they go on vacation together, and they, have matching T-shirts made and whatever. And, and they're there for them if they need the hand holding, and they will talk long into the night and all that stuff. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm sorry to say, I tend to keep things much more professional. I have very few clients who I've ever had to talk off the ledge. I think when my sort of strategy with that is usually to just, talk about it. Like, okay, you're hitting a wall. All right, let's make a plan. Let's, what are the steps we can take to address this? So, I do see my I don't know, role as less of a handholder and more as a doer or a manager of those problems. It's but again, that is really, I think that is something that you figure out as you talk to an agent. If you're, shopping for agents and you have interest from multiple agents, you need to be honest with yourself about what kind of a person, what kind of a writer you are, and that's fine. I'm not trying to disparage the agents who make t-shirts. That style works extremely well for some people. And there are brilliant authors who, are total, need a lot of hand holding, are very emotional. The history of Western literature is full of authors like that. Maxwell Perkins's couch is, famous for authors, crying into it. So it can go any sort of way. So I don't think I don't want to say, don't call up your agent in the middle of the night if you're, having a panic attack, because some agents are okay with that. It's just really about finding the right one for you.
So just kind of setting those ground rules in the initial conversation and making sure that that's going to fly on both sides, right?
Yeah. Setting the ground rules, and no one says you have to slavishly hold to those ground rules either. I think it's, more just about getting a sense of whether this seems like, the kind of person you can work with and what kind of working style works best for you, and that can be the kind of thing too that can lead to an agent breakup or can change as your career develops. Certainly, some people start off very grounded and for whatever reason become much less grounded. There's anything can happen between when you sign the agency agreement and when you when you break up. So there's I feel like if there's one sort of takeaway from a lot of what we're talking about, it's that there's just not one size fits all to any of this stuff. Whether it comes to agents, publishing, and I know that's something that authors are constantly looking for because it is so much of you writing alone in your room and trying to figure out this kind of publishing system that's been set up. But at the end of the day, you're just not going to find that 10 things to checklist, 10 item checklist. And if you do these, you will have an agent and a book published. It just doesn't work that way. But, then
if you find out that 10 list, come back and tell us. That would be a great episode.
I'd love to, yeah.
Well, I know we're running a little long here, so why don't we do two more questions and call it a day? One question I always want to ask, from your perspective, because you know far more literary agents than I'm ever going to know. You have a far broader perspective of the industry overall. So beyond just checking online, and obviously anybody who's watching or listening to this is already a subscriber to the podcast. They're head and shoulders above the other riffraff writers. But what is a good way to evaluate an agent short of meeting them in person? And even that sometimes is not a great tell, because somebody can put up a great front for a night or two at a conference, and then over time you're going to learn that they've got some bad work habits. So assuming somebody's listened to this, they say, my God, John Rudolph sounds like the perfect agent, and they send you a query, but it's about the Civil War and there's no humor in it, and you say, no, I'm out. But then they have to go the sad way of finding another agent.
Sure.
What are the best ways for authors to evaluate literary agents and try and find somebody that's going to be reputable and going to be a good fit?
Well, I mean, I think so. So one thing I certainly recommend, as we discussed before, check the acknowledgments of published books that you love from major publishers, and see who those agents are. Once you have done that, look in Publishers Weekly or in Publishers Marketplace and see again if they're those agents who they're selling to. I mean, I think a good tell for a reputable agent is if it's someone who is selling to the major publishers, the big six publishers. If you're finding an agent who's done a lot of little deals or has done a lot of foreign deals, but not a lot of sales to major publishers, that can be a sign that this person is not great. Certainly, you never want to work with someone who charges for for their services. I mean, that's disreputable. And any agent who charges for services is not really a agent. They're going against the AAR guidelines. I mean, so yeah, you want to look out for them. It is perfectly legitimate once you start talking to agents to ask to speak to some of their clients. When authors ask me that, I'm perfectly happy to put them in touch with clients who will hopefully say wonderful things about me. That can be extremely helpful for evaluating. I will say, beyond that, I think I think beyond that, it's just really, there are, and I don't want to give any websites or listservs or anything, or Twitter feeds to specifics, just because I don't really know them. But I know there's a lot of chatter out there about these things. And I know there are websites that discuss good agents, bad agents. I know, you can look up and see if they are members of the AAR. What's that? Association of Author Representatives, I think it's called. You can look at look at the Writers Guild. And for the children's side, you can see who has been involved in the children's book community, who's been doing SCBWI appearances, who, what kinds of books they've sold. That's another thing too. If you're a middle grade author and you're looking at agents and you get a bite from an agent who's only done adult work, I mean, that's kind of a sign there. So, you do your research, like anything else. You're applying for a job. You don't just apply for a job without knowing what the company is or what it does. Look them up. The information is out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, authors, not all authors, but some, are endlessly lazy because over the, I think it's 13 or 14 years now that I've been running Middle Grade Ninja, I've gotten more than once a year the email from a random author who says, "Hello, stranger. One of these days, I'm going to read one of your books, but for today, I just wondered if you could take a look at my proposal and maybe recommend the 5 or 10 best agents for me to query." It's like, come on, man. I got a whole blog. Go read. It's available.
Yeah.
And then my kind of catch-all question is, what is the most crucial bit of advice you'd like to impart to any authors and would-be authors who are listening or watching to this? And feel free to impart a couple of other bits of wisdom as well, if you like.
Well, okay. Let's see. Read. You can't be an author if you don't read.
Amen.
Yeah, read widely, read broadly. Don't just read in your genre either. Read YA, read adult. Read. That's one. 2, do your homework. So join SCBWI. Make sure that what a middle grade novel looks like if that's what you're writing. In terms of word count, so you're not submitting the 200,000 word novel and calling it middle grade. I don't know. Do your research about agents, and don't just sort of submit to us blindly. Look up submission guidelines. Write to specific agents. Write personal query letters. Don't just say to dear sir or madam. Don't send the same query letter to everyone in the publishing universe and I mean, you shouldn't do that anyway, but and then leave all the names in the submission in the to field, because that always feels great.
Undoubtedly, though, it would save time.
It would save time. It would, but it's worth taking the time. Be patient. That is another good one. It's a long haul. It's a long haul. It can take quite a while to get your agent in the first place. The submission process, we ask clients to give us a year to try and place your book, and sometimes it can take that full year. And then once the book is sold, it typically takes about 1.5 to 2 years until it's published. So it's a long process. It's a long, slow process. So patience is a virtue. And then finally, submit. Just send it out there. I mean, I know I'm saying there's a lot of work you need to do and this and that, and it sounds like a lot, but I'll go to a conference so often, or I'll do a talk like this, and and I'll say, I'm open for submission, send me stuff, and I'll meet with individual authors and I'll talk about their books and I'll say, yeah, I'd love to see it, and then crickets, or 6 months later, they say, 6 months, year and a half later, I met you in 2017 at this conference and you expressed interest in my book. I'm sending it now. I mean,
yeah. I was the one with red hair.
Right, I was the one with red hair. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, maybe I did. I'm sure I did. I've met a lot of people since then. I've been killing my brain cells with alcohol since then. Like I'm just not gonna remember. This is a business of connections, and so to be able to make a connection in a reasonable amount of time is a very good thing to do. But by far the worst thing you can do is just not send in your stuff. I mean, sitting on it, waiting on it, trying to figure out who's the right person, the one right person to send my stuff to. It's a fool's errand. So take a deep breath, steal up your courage and send it out. Worst thing we do is say no. There's a lot of us agents out there and a lot of good ones. So, don't be worried. You will, if your work stands up, you will find the right person for you.
Sean, this has been just such a wonderful conversation, just a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you taking the time to share all of this with me and with the esteemed audience.
My pleasure. This has been great. Thank you very much. This has really been good.
Where can people find out more about you online?
Again, our website is Dystel.com, www.dystel.com. That's the best place to start. Our Twitter feed, I think, is @Dystel or @DG&B. I'm not sure if that's one of the. I think either that's our Twitter or that's our Instagram or they're both. But our Twitter feed is pretty active, so definitely look us up on Twitter. I'm not a great tweeter, but our agency does quite a bit. Yeah, that's really the place to look. Start with our website, go to Twitter, and like I said earlier, our submission guidelines are on there. Agent bios, client list, and if you go to the Illustrator page, you'll see lots of pretty pictures. So,
well, that's incentive right there. Go look at the pretty pictures. You don't want to miss out on that.
Yep.
And as always, esteemed audience, you can find out more about the show, more about me, more about literary agents and publishing professionals, and anything you want to know at middlegradeninja.com. You can follow me on Twitter at MGNinja. You can download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees if you're going to the library. And really, who's listening to this who's not going to the library? Next time you're there, ask the librarians to stock a copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. You'll read it for free, and so will somebody else. John, if you would, I've been asking our guest to sign us off. Our sign-off phrase is hi-ya and what have you, very ninja-like. When you sign us off?
Hiya and what have you.